Hello, all you freedom-loving people. Welcome to another episode of Front Page. I'm your host, Scott Cameron Goulet. Amid a series of sanctions from the Western world, Vladimir Putin has gone to war with the Ukraine. Why haven't the West's toughest sanctions stopped Putin? Meanwhile, most Americans don't need to wear masks anymore. The CDC has issued updated guidelines for mask regulations. More Democratic-controlled cities have also announced that they will lift vaccine mandates and vaccine passports in the near future. Of course, these changes aren't really due to fewer cases in the U.S., but rather the truckers who are driving to D.C. Faced with a wave of condemnation at home and abroad, Trudeau also had to withdraw the use of the Emergencies Act. Okay, let's get into it. The headlines in the media over the past 2 days have been about Russia's special military operation into Ukraine. Several Western countries announced sanctions against Russia and claimed that they were unprecedentedly harsh, but Russia's offensive has apparently not abated at all. Why is that? In an interview with radio hosts Clay Travis and Buck Sexton, President Trump said, "Had I been in office, not even thinkable, this would never have happened." True, because when President Trump was in office, the United States did not need to import energy from abroad and instead exported oil. But now the United States and Europe, especially Germany, are dependent on Russian oil and gas. I have analyzed these situations on my membership site. None of the current sanctions target Russia's energy exports. That means countries are still buying crude oil and natural gas from Russia. How big is this part of the deal? Javier Blas, an energy and commodities columnist at Bloomberg, tweeted on February 24th, "If nothing changes, the EU, UK, and US will buy in the next 24 hours. 3.5 million barrels of Russian oil, crude and products, and another 275 million cubic meters of gas. At today's prices, that's worth more than $700 million. That means these Western countries that are most active in sanctioning Russia condemn Putin while sending him money every day. So why should Putin listen to what these politicians say? The West cannot punish on the one hand and then reward Russia on the other by buying from them." Putin claimed in his speech on February 24th that the confrontation between Russia and Ukraine was caused by the Soviet Communist Party's division of Russia and that the Communist Party was to blame. Ukrainians hate the Soviet Communist Party because the Stalinist agricultural collectivization campaign in the former Soviet Union caused a famine that killed 6 million people in Ukraine, which Ukrainians considered to be a genocide. However, they did not eliminate communist influence in their operations and also colluded with and helped the CCP for economic interests. After the collapse of the former Soviet Union, Ukraine was supposed to become a democratic country. However, as we have talked about on our members' website, Ukraine's transformation was not complete, nor was the influence of communism completely removed. Ukraine has sold advanced weapons left behind by the former Soviet Union to the CCP for economic gain. This is tantamount to helping the CCP build up an advanced military force. The government has also succumbed to the pressure and monetary temptation of the CCP to cancel the cultural performance that the CCP fears the most, which is the Shenyang performance. The global economic crisis in 2008 hit Ukraine's economy hard with rising unemployment and currency devaluation. At the same time, this became an excuse for the CCP to induce the Ukrainian government to deny visas for the Shenyang art troupe. According to Ukrainian government sources, the CCP promised open-ended financial aid in order to prevent Shenyang from performing. The Ukrainian government was tempted by economic interests and canceled Shenyang's performances twice. So, why is the CCP so afraid of Shenyang? Shenyang's performance is an expression of China's 5,000-year-old traditional culture, a culture that existed before the CCP took power. As we mentioned, one of Shenyang's slogans is "China before communism. It shows how beautiful the world is without communism and what damage communism has done to the world.
You are not just watching a performance. You are witnessing a culture reborn. Now, you'll see what the modern world has never seen. China, before communism.
The CCP is therefore very afraid of Shenyang. Everywhere Shenyang goes, Chinese embassies and consulates interfere, often threatening to cut off economic, diplomatic, and political relations. There is also strong opposition to the government's approach in Ukraine. Leonid Kravchuk, the first president of Ukraine, was informed of the news and said, "Art should not be limited by power, government, and politics. If it is constrained by them, it is no longer art." But unfortunately, the opposition was not strong enough to correct the government's mistakes. The Biden administration will announce today, Friday, February 25th, a major shift in mask requirements, meaning most Americans will no longer need to wear masks in indoor public places. The Associated Press reported that the CDC announced new requirements to determine whether masks are recommended. The details had not yet been released at the time that we were recording this program. All we know is that the new criteria will not just focus on the number of cases, but will also take into account hospitalization rates and the ability of local hospitals to treat patients. Under the CDC's current guidance, which considers only the number of cases, about 95% of the counties across the U.S. recommend wearing masks. If the new standards are followed, the vast majority of Americans would no longer be in areas where masks are required in indoor public places. Common sense dictates that it would be more reasonable to have guidelines that take into account the full range of case numbers and hospitalization rates, as well as local medical capacity. So, why did the experts at the CDC previously set such low-level and unreasonable guidelines? Because most people were very cooperative. Although there were mass rallies everywhere to protest the pandemic mandates, they all rallied for a few hours and then left. At that point, the government could just ignore them. For the first few days after the Canadian truckers arrived in Ottawa, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau hid in a secure place, and the Mayor of Ottawa urged the drivers to go home. He said that their voices had been heard. That's how protests are supposed to go: gather for a couple of hours and then everyone goes home. But if the truckers had done that, nothing would have changed. But as the world watched, the truckers held out for weeks and finally got the politicians scared. Now truckers in the U.S. haven't even made it to the White House yet, and Democratic-controlled areas are announcing that they are going to cancel vaccine passports. New York City plans to phase out measures such as the COVID-19 vaccine mandate and the vaccine passport in the coming weeks, Mayor Eric Adams said on February 23rd. Adams said, "I can't wait to get it done. I'm not going to get ahead of the science because I'm ready to get ahead of all of this and get back to a level of normalcy." A few days ago, Adams hinted that he wanted to end the vaccine passport. That's because the system affects venues including restaurants, gyms, and theaters. Wednesday's comments are the clearest about vaccine passports and vaccine mandates, but the mayor has yet to provide a clear timeline on exactly when the passports will be eliminated. On the same day, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot announced that mask and vaccine requirements will be scrapped for certain locations starting February 28th. Both New York City and Chicago have been among the most strictest cities for the past 2 years. According to new data from the CDC, COVID-19 case rates in fully vaccinated people rose by more than 1,000% between December 11th, 2021 and January 8th, 2022. The case rate among those who received a booster dose skyrocketed, rising some 2,400% between the same dates. While cases also rose among the unvaccinated, they were at a much lower rate. The unvaccinated were just 3.2 times more likely to test positive for COVID-19 in January. The end result is that the difference in infection rates between vaccinated and unvaccinated populations is getting smaller. COVID-19 associated hospitalizations also increased among the vaccinated, from 1.2 per 100,000 to 35.2 per 100,000 between the same dates. It is definitely time to reassess how we treat the unvaccinated. Before we move on, please like and share this video and help us to spread the truth. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you have already subscribed, please double check to make sure that you are still subscribed. Okay, let's get back into it. Under pressure, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said on Wednesday that the government will end the use of the Emergencies Act. Trudeau was joined by Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, by Minister of Justice David Lametti, by Minister of Public Safety Marco Mendicino, and by Minister of Emergency Preparedness Bill Blair for the announcement. Trudeau said, "Today, after careful consideration, we're ready to confirm that the situation is no longer an emergency. Therefore, the federal government will be ending the use of the Emergencies Act." Although the situation is no longer an emergency, he added that the movement is still present, still organizing, and still potentially a threat to democracy. He added, "We need to constantly work to defend and improve our democracy at home and around the world." In a video on February 18th, former Conservative Party leader Andrew Scheer openly criticized the whole thing as Trudeau's own provocation.
A lot of talk throughout his career in the early days when he was in opposition, talking about the need to have dialogue with people who are upset, to hear both sides, to not demonize people for having a different point of view. What did he do this time? He insulted them. He started dehumanizing them, referring to people who have questions about making a healthcare decision, started calling them racist, misogynist. Keep in mind, this is the guy who did blackface so often that he can't remember how many times he did it. This is the guy who fired his attorney general because she, a strong woman, wouldn't go along with his corruption, wouldn't go along with his attempts to interfere in a criminal court case.
He criticized Trudeau's approach as the same as that of a totalitarian communist state doing everything he can to deprive people of their freedom in the name of public safety, order, and peace.
You know, this is the exact same playbook that dictatorial governments in Eastern Europe used to use all the time. Everything that they did to take away people's freedom was always justified for things like public safety and to keep order and to keep peace. Remember the Berlin Wall, the excuse for the Berlin Wall was to keep foreign enemies out. It was never presented to the people of East Berlin that it was going to keep them trapped inside. The way the state dehumanizes and completely discredits anybody who stands up against the abuse of power, it's very, very eerily similar to what Justin Trudeau's doing today.
On Monday, the House of Commons voted on a motion to endorse the government's access to the Emergencies Act. The Senate is still debating the matter. Lametti said that any violations that occurred within 10 days of the emergency measures will continue to be followed up through the judicial system. A Freedom Convoy spokesman accused the MPs of betraying their own constituents. Scheer remarked that Trudeau's attitude toward the protesters was dependent on whether the protesters' views matched his.
But remember in 2020, when anti-energy protesters were blocking rail lines in central Canada because of a natural resource project several provinces away in British Columbia, Trudeau did nothing to clear the rail lines then. In fact, not only did he do nothing to clear the blockades, he actually sent a government minister to negotiate with the protesters. They were setting things on fire on railway tracks. Trudeau didn't see the need for emergency measures then. He didn't talk about freezing anyone's bank accounts when it was anti-energy protesters, crippling the Canadian economy. That lasted 4 weeks. But the difference in 2020 to this protest is that Justin Trudeau agreed with the anti-energy protesters back in 2020, so he allowed them to continue.
So we'll have to wait to find out if Canadian voters buy into Trudeau's actions. 2 Manhattan prosecutors in charge of the criminal investigation into President Trump and his business practices have resigned. The 2 departing prosecutors are Carrie Dunn and Mark Pomerantz. Both began working on the Trump investigation under former District Attorney Cyrus Vance. Their resignations raise questions about the future of the investigation. The new District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, had asked them to stay when he took office in January. They decided to resign after Bragg expressed doubts about moving forward with the case against Trump. Trump's attorney, Ron Fischetti, said the departure of the officers suggests Bragg will not pursue criminal charges against the former president. Fischetti said, "In my mind, the case is over. There's no question in my mind that they did it because there wasn't a case that they could prove, and there was no purpose in them staying there any longer." Fischetti added, "My client didn't do anything wrong." Danielle Filson, a spokeswoman for Bragg, said the investigation is still ongoing, but the grand jury investigation has stalled and did not meet last month. Meanwhile, in a separate case against Trump, New York Attorney General Letitia James has stepped up a civil investigation into Trump Inc. She is investigating whether the former president's family business misrepresented the value of its assets and allowed certain executives to avoid paying taxes by compensating them with perks that were off the books. Last week, a state judge ruled that President Trump's 2 adult children, Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump, must sit for depositions. Fischetti said that the Trump family will appeal the ruling. For now, Trump has neither been indicted nor charged with misconduct in the Bragg and James investigations. Okay, this is our show for today. Thank you for tuning in. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to like and subscribe this video and share it with your friends and family, because everybody deserves to know the truth. Again, thank you for watching Front Page, and we will see you next time.